All right, well, I like to start off the wine tasting with a little bit of tour of the vineyard because I think it's important that there's a saying in the wine industry, you can only make good wine with good grapes. So it all starts out here. We spent a lot of time in the vineyard, and I was telling Gary a little earlier, who also is in the wine industry, that the preparation of the soil is probably one of the most critical things for the vineyard. And I like to demonstrate this because these vines here are 7-8 years old now, nice thick stalks. And I wanted to show you along the fence up here, you'll see those vines, and you'll see they look like they were probably planted 4 or 5 years later. Well, in fact, they were planted at the same day. The difference is that each one of these rows was ripped. There's this iron tool right here, attaches to the back of my John Deere, and it's about 2 feet deep, and we do 4 or 5 passes. And the reason for that is because up here we're part of the Missoula flood area in Oregon, and we've got about 12 inches of loam, and the rest of it's hard clay. And the difference that you see between here, the fully mature vines, versus these over here is that ripper goes down and it aerates, it turns the clay and breaks it up. So that when we planted the rootstock here, the roots had a real great opportunity to penetrate the soil and really, have a good opportunity to grow. Over here, the ripper's not available against the fence, so we just dug, holes, and we only went about 12 inches deep. And so what happened there is a combination of a couple things. Is that number one, the roots were banging against that hard clay, and secondarily, my neighbor's property here had all these trees that they were blocking the sun, whereas these got the sun. But I think the clay was the biggest issue. These first 4 rows here are Chardonnay, and the Chardonnay we'll talk about when we get back into the tasting room. The Chardonnay is much more challenging to make than any of the reds for a couple reasons. First of all, Chardonnay vines are very prone to powdery mildew, which means that you have to do a lot of pruning, a lot of thinning. It's a very robust plant. The leaves are big, they're very clustered together, and that's not good for the vines. You got to have air going through the vineyard, through the vines, so that they don't develop this powdery mildew. The reds aren't quite as susceptible to it, but the bottom line is, and I was talking to Gary about it, where he's in the Reno area where it's very arid and dry, he doesn't have to really worry about moisture and a lot of diseases, where here in Oregon we spray a lot. We spray a lot with sulfur, and we also spray with some other organic chemicals to try to keep that, but mainly we have to really thin this out. Now you'll see right now, if you look closely, we're at bud break. We just started, the buds are just starting to pop. And so what's going to happen over the next couple weeks is this vineyard is going to really start growing very, very quickly. And what we have here is what's called a Spur pruned vineyard. And what that means is that you'll notice these big arms coming off the stalk. These are called cordones, versus a cane type pruning, where you might see right now, especially if you went by a vineyard, especially if you went wine tasting today and you looked at the vineyards, you might see the stalks where these big arms aren't there, but you might see a big stalk like that, then one skinny little cane coming off like that. And that's called cane pruning. There's 2 different types. It's kind of a mixed bag on the quality of the grapes. A lot of people think the quality of the grapes are a little bit better with a spur pruning. And what's going to happen over the next, probably in mid-May, late May, we're going to do a lot of thinning in here. These things are going to start growing, and this is what's called a vertical trellis system. You can see that these spurs have been trained over the last 7 years, so they're going to start growing up like this. And then during the growth season, I'll come back in and we'll do a lot of pruning to keep it under control, because number one, all the grapes will kind of grow right in this region right here, which makes it more accessible. And secondarily, we have to net the whole vineyard, because once the grapes get at about 18 or 19 Brix level, the birds come in. And it's beautiful. It's really fascinating to come out here early in the morning, and these trees right here, they're just thousands of them just waiting. And so I can always tell when the grapes are almost ready. When they show up, we get the nets on.
Yeah.
And I'll show you when we go over here my netting apparatus. It's kind of bad shape right now looking at it. But
I was trying to take it apart the other day. So
yeah,
I
well,
did-
don't take it
it's an
apart
eyesore.
because
So
I
you
still
don't even need to come out here and check the bricks. You just look at the birds.
Well, you know, I was telling Gary that I like the bricks levels at 21 to 23. The birds are happy at 18.
All right. Okay.
So, and that's the critical area. Those last 2 or 3 weeks, September is the critical month. We can rely upon July and August to be really good months, nice and warm and hot. September is kind of, you know, it's all over the place. Last year we had a great September. It was warm all through the September. We harvested at 23 bricks. That wine's going to be really good. It's similar to the reserve that we started off, and we'll have some more of that when we go back into the tasting room. And what you're drinking right now, most of you, is a 2019. It's a good wine. It's not quite as good as the 2018 because 2019 September was cold and wet, and we really had to. We waited as long as we possibly could to harvest. You wait too long, you start getting what's called botrytis, which is kind of a fungus, and you can lose the whole crop. So that's kind of the initial point of how important it is to get your ground ready. And we planted 400 vines, about 150 Chardonnay, about 250 Pinot. We didn't lose a single one. We irrigated for the first 2 or 3 years. And now, unless we have 2 or 3 triple digit kind of temperature days, I don't have to worry too much about irrigation.